You can also,
Thank you, sir.
and okay, so we're continuing our look at the developments in the news that seem to harmonize with what we've been sharing prophetically, and to get greater insight and perhaps encouragement as we do so. So we've had a couple studies. One first part that got cut off because of some technical challenges. And then we had a nice full study last Wednesday, and we want to pick it up where we left off last time. So the last article that we looked at in our last study was about how Peter Thiel, who runs this company Palantir, that is uh, uh, mopping up all of the data of the world digitally and sharing that with particularly with the governments of the world and particularly with our government and the intelligence agencies, and doing so in a way that's very concerning, but also has been giving these strange messages about the Antichrist coming, and also how that connects with uh, AI. Um, so we won't repeat any more about that, but picking up from that article, again, we're just looking at the headlines because we have so many news articles that it would just be too much to try to get into the substance really of these articles. Um, just to see what's a broader picture of what's really going on in the world. And all of these articles, again, I think there's something like almost 500 articles I have here just from the past couple of months. I mean, it's just so much going on right now that we can only look at a broad sweep. So the next article that we have here at the top, headline is Scientists Warn Governments Must Bomb AI Labs to Prevent the End of the World. So, well, this sounds like almost an absurd article. These are not just crackpots somewhere on the internet. These are actually very prominent top academic scientists in the world who are suggesting that governments need to literally bomb AI labs to stop the end of the world. That some of these people think that AI is somehow becoming sentient or thinking for itself. um, there are some indications that certain AI algorithms are developing a sort of self-preservation mindset, where there have been certain AI algorithms that where they've attempted to shut them down, and it's taken active measures to try to prevent that from happening. And so, literally, these scientists think we literally need to blow up the labs in order to turn it off before it's too late. And I just think that's an unbelievable thing that's happening. Whether there's any, we're not getting into the substance of what people think about these articles, whether they're really accurate. We're trying to understand the mindset of what people are out there are happening in the world. And we also want to look at the mindset that's being projected into the media space in the propaganda to try to shift the thinking of the people of the world and where it's going and how that's affecting what's going on in the world. The next article is called, this is an amazing development. We might look a little bit at the substance of this one just because it's so amazing. And this is the 2025 Centennial Conclave, Unmasking Lucis Trust's Century-Long Agenda. Here it is here for global transformation. So the Lucis Trust was, of course, originally its original name was called the Lucifer Publishing Company. It literally is channeled messages from a demon to a woman called Alice Bailey. She's the second most published woman in the world after Ellen White, interestingly enough. She is the successor, ultimately, to Madame Blavatsky, the great theosophist from the 1800s, of the 19th century, and she lived right into the mid 1900s. Um, and she was very much involved in the development of the United Nations, the entire World Core Curriculum educational program for the United Nations that has been adopted by every country in the world is based on the writings of Alice A. Bailey. And she received these messages from this demon called Dwal Kul, who supposedly dwells in the Himalayan mountains. And among the many revelations that she wrote about was that these entities, these spiritual entities that she believes are basically humans who have evolved to a higher state of consciousness than we are aware of, which is, of course, itself a deception, that they come together and have a special meeting or a conclave every 100 years at the quarter of the century. So, and that this has been happening for, I think, 500 or 600 years now. So in 1625 and 1725, 1825, 1925, and now 2025 was the next time when one of these meetings was scheduled. And apparently this meeting was held on June 11th, 2025. And this was especially the meeting when supposedly it was the time for the manifestation of the hierarchy, as she calls it. So the externalization of the hierarchy, as she calls it, and that the externalization of the hierarchy ultimately is the idea that, and there's quite some background noise, so maybe we should mute for if we're not actually having something to say at the moment. This externalization of the hierarchy is actually essentially what we think of as the demons appearing as angels of light. And this meeting was about planning for exactly when they were going to do that. And again, this meeting supposedly is 100 years in the planning, but it's now very interestingly coinciding prophetically with the timeline that we are expecting these things to happen biblically, because Satan understands God's true timeline and he is working to counteract. That's why the United Nations has an Agenda 2030.
Um,
Yes, brother?
Brother Craig, can I ask a question?
Sure.
When it says here, stages in the externalization of the hierarchy, does that mean bringing the hierarchy, making it manifest physically?
That's right, yes.
Okay.
Now, there's actually stages that will lead to that actually happening. And I believe that's the very time in which we live. And the things that are developing in our world right now are working to prepare the world to accept these entities as 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 things that we should believe are here to help us and to take us to the next stage of our evolution.
So externalization means the external means to bring to light, bring to physical manifestation, correct?
That's right, yes. And
Thank you.
anybody who wants to, you can see here at the top the where to find this article. I can certainly send it to anybody if they want it. There's
I'm
also
interested in that.
there's been some people as well, even Adventists, who shared messages recently on YouTube, which I could also share those as well, where they talk about how this is happening and
Please.
the details of this article. I won't go through it all, but this is a very significant development that the people like Albert Pike, who was a very high Freemason and talked about 3 world wars that would come. The first of two, which came about exactly really how he said they would, and is the Third World War, which he said would be a clash of civilizations between Islam and Christianity. And we can see how the world is moving towards such a development. Of course, Satan can't see the future the same way as God, but Satan is in control of the nations because he is the prince of this world. And the kings of this world have committed fornication with the beast. And so he can bring things about that he, quote, predicts are going to happen or make it seem like they're coming about. And he's doing it all for deceptive purposes. And yet these are startling developments, and they're all working towards this ultimate Agenda 2030, which is the time when Satan's kingdom should be established on this earth. Of course, we've seen in our prophetic timeline that that's also roughly around the time that we expect will be very close to the second coming. And of course, is nearly almost exactly 2,000 years from the time that Christ died on the cross. Very interesting, as far as we think of the 6,000-year timeline of the Bible. So these are very interesting things that are happening. I think you know, I don't encourage people to look too deeply into these things, because these are ultimately demonic deceptions, and yet we want some light into what the demons are thinking and what they're planning. And we can see how it's harmonizing with what we're coming to understand prophetically from the Bible is actually happening. Because Satan understands what God is doing, and he's seeking to do his counter work to the work of God. So I think that's a very significant development that's come to pass. And it's only, even though the meeting happened back in June, the details about it have just come out in the past month or two. And that's why we're talking about it now. Here is another article from the AP News Press, and how ex-FBI Director James Comey has been indicted on 2 charges. So one of the things that President Trump and his administration has been doing has been indicting many of his, quote, perceived enemies, many of the people who weaponized the structures of the government against him during his first term and during the interlude between his first and second term. He is now kind of turning the tables on these people and indicting them, and this former FBI director is one of them. Of course, we know that every secret thing will be exposed before the end, and many of the things that have been hidden in the darkness are being exposed. And so these are interesting developments, but also the way that the government can simply be weaponized by a single person to take out their perceived enemies, as it were, is also sort of concerning development, because even though maybe some of these people deserve what's coming to them, again, we're not getting into the substance of whether this is right or wrong ultimately, or whether they're valid or not. But the general tendency of the government being weaponized against people at a very sophisticated level is something that we want to watch as Christians, because we know it ultimately will be turned against Bible-believing Christians, these same structures. Here's another article from the New Republic, that's sort of a left-leaning publication. Trump, quote, jokes about rigging elections with Turkish president. So Trump was having a meeting with the president of Turkey, Erdogan, and there was sort of a hot mic when he didn't realize that people were listening to him, and he was making jokes about rigging elections with him. Very interesting. Here from the New York Times, Trump says he wants to give aid to struggling farmers. So, first of all, the idea that farmers are struggling and all that means, and we know one of the prophetic signs that we are looking for to happen in our time that Christ warned us about was famine. In fact, nearly all of the signs that Christ pointed to, the wars, the rumors of wars, the pestilences, all those things have already happened and are happening at an increasing pace. The one that hasn't really happened on a real global scale yet is famine. Yet we've seen in previous updates as well, that it almost seems like a planned, engineered famine is in the works. And farmers are struggling, and here Trump gives this article that he wants to so-called give out aid to these struggling farmers. Whether this will really happen, what his real intent is behind it, we don't really know. And of course, in some ways, that also is a sort of very socialistic idea that seems to go against much of what his rhetoric typically is. And also the fact that he's supposedly wanting to be shrinking government and spending less money. And yet here he's looking to give handouts to farmers. So it's a strange development. Here is an article also from the Express, which is a UK publication. The U.S. Navy puts on a, quote, light show with a 7,500-mile thermonuclear weapons test. So the U.S. has been increasingly publicly, this has been going on for since the Cold War and continued after the Cold War, but a much slower pace. But in recent years, and especially in the past year or so, in the Trump administration, these public tests of our nuclear missiles has been ramping up, and they've been really putting a public spotlight on it in the clash with Russia over Ukraine. And Russia has been increasing its nuclear rhetoric, and the US is increasing its nuclear rhetoric. And both sides are making active steps to actually be able to engage in a nuclear conflict by testing everything that they can. And this is one more evidence of that. And we've also seen again, especially the publications coming out of the United Kingdom seem to be especially pushing this rhetoric into the public sphere. Here's another article from, again, the same Express in the UK. Russia declares NATO and the EU, meaning the European Union, are now, quote, at war with Moscow in chilling escalation. So there are elements within Russia, and these are not just, again, not just crackpots somewhere in Russia. These are very high-level public officials in the government, in high-level security officials in Russia who are publicly saying that we're already at war with Russia with the developments that are happening with the NATO and the European Union over what's happening in Ukraine. I think this is especially talking about how Trump was giving permission for long-range missiles to be given to Ukraine that could reach deep into Russia. And this was one of the red lines that Russia has explicitly told us would justify them having a nuclear response. And Russia has given, unlike America, that tends to try to be ambiguous in how and when we might use nuclear weapons, Russia has increasingly tried to be very crystal clear about the lines over which, if they're crossed, they feel justified in using nuclear weapons. And nearly every single line that they put out there, we are deliberately crossing over, as if we're just provoking them to take this step. Here from the Express again, F-35s, that's our most advanced fighter aircraft that are nuclear capable, and Reaper drones join huge U.S. naval fleet patrolling the Caribbean. So there's been a huge military buildup in the Caribbean here in the Americas, and especially with the rhetoric over Venezuela and these so-called drug trafficking that's coming from South America, some of which is valid, but of course is also at the same time very much things that our intelligence agencies and such have been directly involved in for decades now. But suddenly we're using as an excuse to possibly engage in open military hostilities in South America, in the global South, which of course, again, seems to directly contradict much of Trump's rhetoric in leading up to this recent election, where he said he was going to be the peace president who would put an end to all of these global, so-called globalist wars. And yet now he seems to be very much on fire for increasing hostilities right here in the Americas. And interesting that the connection with the global South, where we've had now two popes with connections to the global South. The past pope from Argentina, the most recent pope, even though he's an American, had a strong connection with, I believe it was Peru for many years. I think he was in Peru for 20 years. And of course, even our current General Conference president of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is also from the global South, from Brazil. And of course, probably the fastest growing place of Christianity in the world, and including Adventism, is in the global South. So these are interesting developments. Next article, which is similar to a previous article we saw in our update last week. Pete Hegseth, who is the now Secretary of War, not just the Secretary of Defense, is going by that rhetoric. He orders a rare, urgent meeting of hundreds of generals and admirals. So they had this special meeting where all of the top I think, multi-star generals and admirals in the world, some 800 of them, were all required to personally come back to America to a meeting in person. And precisely what happened behind the scenes at that meeting, one wonders. It seems it's unprecedented in our lifetime, and it seems to me that the only real justification for such a move would be to maintain secrecy as you were preparing for war. Otherwise, there would be no reason not to be able to do it simply over secure digital channels, which are available to them and didn't require all these generals and admirals to come in person. The next article that we have here is from a publication called the National Pulse, of which I'm not very familiar. But here, Russian official issues nuclear threat to Trump's America. So again, the rhetoric over nuclear, potential nuclear conflict continues to proceed apace and to escalate on a near daily, at least weekly basis from both sides in this conflict, and really seems to be being agitated. And again, whether these things are real, whether these things are propaganda, the mindset is being put out there to expect that these things could happen at any time. Here from MSN.com, Europeans privately tell Russia they are ready to down jets. So again, NATO countries on the border of Ukraine in particular, and the former Soviet countries are threatening to down Russian planes if they come too close to NATO airspace, which would be a significant escalation and something that could very quickly increase to become something more than just a single incident. It can become an excuse to escalate the conflict. Here from Reason Magazine, Donald Trump and Peter Thiel are using AI to supercharge the surveillance state. So again, Peter Thiel, he's the one who has this company, Palantir, that is creating a digital file on basically every single person in the world, where the so-called Total Information Awareness Program that was originally in the military and defense intelligence organization, and then was outsourced to this private company because there was such backlash publicly that this was being done by the government. But essentially, this private company is now doing it, but then selling all the data to the government. And so the government still is obtaining all of this data. And for instance, and this is not just being done for America, but this data is being given to governments all over the world. For instance, in the recent war in Gaza, the vast majority of targets that were where they literally bombed or killed people were through data that came from this company, Palantir. And now they're using AI algorithms to take this surveillance to an entirely new level. And there's this incredible cooperation between big government and big business, which again, there's a word for that, and that's called fascism. When you bring big government and big business together, that's fascism. It's state capitalism. We're becoming an increasingly fascist government and state. Here from the MSN, Netanyahu, that's the president of Israel, tells the UN that war will continue amid global backlash. So this is before the hostilities in Gaza had ceased, and despite the incredible pressure around the world about the really seemingly genocidal activities happening in Gaza, that Israel was not willing to bow to that pressure and was going to move forward with their objectives regardless of the consequences. And these are strange developments, and it just certainly seems to me that in some way that Israel is ultimately being set up for a great backlash. And we're already really starting to see that backlash in the news. We'll see some later articles in this update about how there is a great anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, and as the Jews themselves would call anti-Semitic backlash happening in the West because of what's been happening in the Gaza war in particular, and also some of the pressure and manipulation and developments happening among the media and other and financial institutions in the West and in America, where Israel, which has been this sort of darling of especially the evangelicals and their dispensational view of prophecy, that there's this undercurrent of backlash that ultimately can be used to push a anti-Sabbath agenda. And I believe that's ultimately where it's heading. That we know the real power behind the scenes is the papacy and the Jesuits, but they often put prominent Jewish institutions and Jewish people in prominent positions so that when things go wrong, then we can, quote, blame the Jews, just like they did in World War II. And we saw what happened there. And it seems like a repeat of history is happening in that regard. And strangely, the government of Israel seems to be falling right into this trap, or maybe actively, secretly participating in it. Because we know the people that are in charge really are really Masons. Here in the Times of Israel publication, this is a publication out of Israel, hundreds of diplomats stage walkout from the UN General Assembly as Netanyahu enters to speak. So, for instance, along the same lines, there was a UN meeting at the General Assembly back in the end of September, and among the global leaders who spoke was President Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. And when he did, literally hundreds of diplomats from countries all over the world walked out before he could give his speech, showing this great backlash that's happening and the consequences of it politically. Here from the Wall Street Journal, French revolutions, quote, great fear linked to the economy, not hysteria, researchers find. So here's a very interesting article that we know prophetically that we had a fulfillment of Revelation 11 back at the time of the French Revolution and the so-called Great Terror at that time, and the very seemingly irrational developments that happened as part of that revolution that were attributed to hysteria and fear. And now here's an interesting article that's saying that there were also economic developments that were related to it, which certainly has some validity to that idea. But we know also that what happened there in France at a local level, which was a partial but incomplete fulfillment of Revelation chapter 11, is going to have a greater complete fulfillment on a global scale in our day, as we have an antitypical Revelation 11. Of course, the very study that we're in right now is a study of the Sixth Trumpet, which brings us all the way through into Revelation 11. We're currently in the time of Revelation chapter 9, but we are rapidly approaching the time of Revelation 11, antitypically. And here are articles coming right out in the mainstream press talking about the French Revolution and how that's affecting our society today. Very interesting. Here's a publication, studyfinds.org. So this is a website that publishes studies from all different scientific and political fields all the time on just an untold number of topics. But this particular one, the science of defiance, why people comply and how to resist. Very interesting article about the psychology of causing people to want to feel like they have to submit to what's going on, even if they don't agree with it, and then how you can also have a mindset that resists falling into that philosophical mindset. Very interesting. Of course, we know when the mark of the beast comes, some will take it in the forehead because they agree with it, but others will simply go along because they feel that they have to. And here is some psychological studies being done on that very issue in the mainstream publications and science publications.
What was the name of the magazine again?
It's called studyfinds.org.
Thank you.
So it's not it's just a website, but it publishes studies from all the time, every day. It highlights studies that have been published in other publications. So the next article that we have is from the Washington Post. Russia training Chinese air unit for possible Taiwan attack, analysts warn. So we've got this great conflict going on in Ukraine and Russia, in Europe. You've got all of the tension going on in the Middle East with Israel having war on essentially 7 different fronts at the current time. Interesting number, 7, including the conflict ultimately with Iran and the one that's been happening in Gaza. And now there's a constant rattling about China and its preparations to attack Taiwan, which will be another major war flashpoint, global war flashpoint in the East. And of course, we'll see there's also articles about how North Korea and South Korea and the tensions there are also escalating again. That it seems like every major potential global war flashpoint is flashing red right now. Here from a publication called The Times, meet the astronauts who will, quote, fly to the moon for the first time in 53 years. Multiple nations, whether America or China, possibly India and Russia, are all supposedly making plans to have, quote, manned missions to the moon, quote, again. Whether that is really the case, whether that will really come to pass, whether we even actually really sent men there in the first place 53 years ago is in doubt. Personally, in my mind, I think there's a lot of reasons to think that that was actually a psyop. It wouldn't change my faith one way or the other whether it really happened or not. But I think there's a lot of reasons to think that there was a lot of deception in what happened back then, and the fact that we've not been able to go back, that there are many top scientists today that say that we currently don't have the technology to make it back to the moon with the manned mission. I certainly think we sent probes there, and we've sent probes to other planets here in the solar system, but whether we sent actual human beings there is another question. And whether that will actually happen. And of course, the technology and with digital technology today to fake doing that would be certainly much easier than it was back then. So even if they claim that they've done it, whether we can really take that to heart, who knows? Just interesting things that people are talking about. Here from MSN again, new details emerge on Hegseth's unusual mass gathering of top brass. So another article on that, having all those generals and admirals come together. Here from Mediate publication, a publication that focuses on what's happening in the media itself. Trump authorizes troops to use, quote, full force against citizens, meaning U.S. citizens. So some of Trump's rhetoric, especially concerning these ICE raids in these sanctuary cities around the country, that Trump has explicitly, publicly given U.S. troops permission to use, quote, full military lethal force against U.S. citizens, which is supposedly never supposed to happen, and has always been something that has been an incredible backlash to even suggest it, and yet not only has it been suggested, it is actually being done. And the backlash seems to be sounding like crickets these days. Um, Here's a publication, variety.com, which is kind of more a media and entertainment publication. Here's a new movie, One Battle After Another, a movie that could rule the conversation. And a very interesting movie about conflict and potential civil war and all kinds of very interesting things that, again, we're just focusing on how psychologically this is affecting people and how they're producing these very sophisticated psychological operations through the media and through entertainment to massage people's minds to be prepared for a seemingly apocalyptic scenario to come to pass. Here from Daily Mail in the UK, Pete Hegseth slammed for being, quote, out of depth as insiders reveal his unusual plans for urgent general summit. So again, another article about how all the generals had to come together, which has been all over the news. But really what happened behind the scenes at that meeting, I don't think we have really heard what really happened there. Here is an article from The Guardian in the UK. Clarence Thomas, that's one of the Supreme Court justices, says precedents might not determine cases on upcoming Supreme Court docket. So until very recently, the idea of precedents, which is if the Supreme Court has made a decision in the past, that a future Supreme Court would not overturn their own decision in the future. Or it's a very rare occasion when that's ever happened. But now the idea that the previous decisions of Supreme Court are a guiding principle for the current decisions. Clarence Thomas, this very conservative Catholic Supreme Court justice, is suggesting that they no longer need to follow the precedent of previous Supreme Court decisions. Now, quite frankly, I think many previous Supreme Court decisions were simply wrong and not even close to being in harmony with what the Constitution actually originally said or intended or meant. But this is still a very interesting development because, of course, we can see how that can be abused for wrong and not just to right previous wrongs. NBC News, Trump says he'll attend Pete Hegseth's gathering of generals to tell them, quote, how well we're doing militarily. And of course, President Trump actually did attend that meeting personally. And some very interesting things were said and done then, which we won't get into all the details here. Here's a public article from the New York Post. Iraq War veteran Thomas Sanford ID'd as the gunman who attacked the Grand Blanc LDS Church, killing 4 and setting it ablaze. That's a Church of Latter-day Saints, a Mormon church, where there was a shooting back earlier this year. And it turned out that it was an Iraq War veteran. And actually, multiple recent so-called mass shootings here in America were done by military American war veterans. And that itself, I think, is a very interesting development. Of course, all of the sort of globalist wars that America has been involved in and the very disturbing and things that happened in these wars has greatly affected our military veterans, many of whom simply thought they were serving America and their country faithfully, only to learn and often be betrayed by our leaders. And this is creating all kinds of psychological problems. Of course, the suicide rate among American veterans is astronomical. I think for the past 20 years, I think more active duty U.S. military members have died by suicide than have died in combat, which is just a startling statistic. And these things are all very interesting developments. Also, these mass shootings are seemingly happening at churches And that is an interesting development to me. Here from the AP News, 4 people dead, several injured in a shooting at a Michigan church. This maybe have been the same church because it's saying it's also a Mormon church. But nevertheless, there's been multiple multi-person shootings at churches this year. And of course, thinking about where that might head, that's a very concerning development. Here from the Daily Mail in the UK, Marjorie Taylor Greene sends deeply concerning suicide message to fans. So Marjorie Taylor Greene is sort of a very considered a quote right-wing supporter of President Trump, pro-MAGA as it were, but of recent time has started to sort of turn against President Trump in certain ways, especially over the release of the Epstein files and certain other things. Also, President Trump's proclivity to enter into conflicts recently militarily around the world when he promised to do the exact opposite. And she's been starting to publicly criticize him. And so President Trump has seemed to have turned on her and has been increasing his public criticism of her. And she's been receiving a lot of death threats. And now she felt necessary to put out a message to tell people that, quote, she's not suicidal because she's worried that she's going to be killed and they're going to claim it's suicide. Like happened supposedly to Jeffrey Epstein himself. So this is a sitting representative of Congress that feels necessary to put out such public messages. Here from the AP News, the Zaporizhia nuclear plant in Ukraine runs on emergency generators for the 5th day. So one of the nuclear plants that's in the east of Ukraine in the war zone, the power has been cut to that nuclear power station. They shut down that nuclear power station quite some time ago because of the war to try to reduce the risk of a meltdown. But in order to truly prevent a meltdown, there still needs to be some power at the plant that's actually coming from the grid in order to prevent the rods from overheating. The radioactive nuclear rods that are normally used to produce the steam and the power, they need to be constantly cooled, and they need power to do that, and that's supposed to be coming from the grid, but the bombing campaign from Russia has cut that power, and so now they're running on emergency generators. And if those emergency generators fail, then a meltdown would happen imminently, and we could have another Chernobyl any day. Here, and there's a lot of rhetoric on both sides about who's really responsible for that, and a lot of propaganda, and we don't know who's really telling the truth, but it's still concerning developments. Here from Time Magazine in America, the danger of Trump's crackdown on blue cities. So President Trump, as part of these ICE raids, especially, has been targeting major cities in America, nearly all of which, so far, have been major Democratic left-wing cities that were so-called sanctuary cities. And whatever you think about that, and whether you think that's right or you think that was deserving and needed to be done, the idea that our military structures and law enforcement structures of the federal government are being turned against Americans in American cities is a very concerning development. And whether such things needed to be done in these cities, the precedent is being set where they can then be turned against any city for any reason by any current or future president. And these are concerning developments. Here from a publication called The Globalist, are Americans becoming, quote, more docile than even the Chinese? So there's been such an onslaught of transformation during this second Trump administration that the opposition on the left among the Democrats is in total chaos, and they've been totally feckless in doing anything to try to provide some balance to what's been happening. And to the point that this article is coming out suggesting that Americans are falling into line even more than those who are under the communist oppressive regime in China. Here from the Wall Street Journal, an exclusive: Pentagon pushes to double missile production for potential China conflict. So just as Russia, through the Ukraine conflict, has turned to a completely war footing and military mobilization economy, where all of their major major industrial industries have been switched over to a war footing and are producing military armaments at an incredible scale. Russia right now is able to produce more armaments and missiles than all of NATO and America combined. And so NATO, and particularly America, is now upping its production of military armaments in preparation for a potential crisis. All sides seem to be taking these incredibly active measures that traditionally have been seen as preparations to go to war. That only happen when you're actively planning to go to war. Here from the New York Times, the man behind Trump's push for an all-powerful presidency, Russell Voigt. Russell Voigt was connected to Project 2025, and he is also one of the ones who has been publicly pushing this idea that the president holds exclusive, nearly unchecked power as the head of the executive branch. And of course, it's very interesting how they manipulate things.
Hello, is anybody there?
We're still here, brother.
I think I lost. Hello, Brother Craig?
Yeah, we can hear you
We're
if you
still
can't hear
here.
us.
Chris?
Yeah, we're still here.
I'm going to have to mute him just because he can't hear us. I can do that. Let's see.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, we're here, brother.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay. So, sorry about that. Crisis. We're just about out of time here, but we'll do a little bit more. Okay. So for many decades now, Congress and the judiciary have attempted to put in structures that have put tremendous shackles and limitations on the power of the president to control the executive branch. And personally, I think in some ways that has actually gone to an extreme, where there was a need for a pushback that ultimately the person who's been elected by the American people to run the executive branch is the president. And that really every single person, and there's literally millions of people that work for the executive branch government of the federal government, all of them ultimately are supposedly serving at the pleasure of the president and are supposed to be doing what the American people elected the president to do. And for many years, there's been this, quote, deep state, as it were, that's been having its own agenda separate from what the president wanted to do, no matter which president was elected on either side of the political spectrum. And Trump has been, unlike most presidents, Trump has really done something to push back against that. But he's taking it to an extreme where he's acting like a dictator and a king. And we don't have dictators and kings in America. There has to be checks and balances. And one of the people that's really pushing the public psychological agenda to go to the extreme of giving the president this sort of all-powerful presidency is this Russell Voigt, connected with this so-called Project 2025 agenda that is actively being implemented now in the second Trump administration, which of course, among many things, includes a explicit call for Sunday rest and honoring Sunday. Here from the AP News, Trump's actions draw comparisons to world leaders who undermine democracies. So another article here from the AP, again about this idea of this increasingly authoritarian streak of President Trump and how he's implementing nearly his entire agenda through executive actions and not through the traditional legislative and judicial process that our country was designed to operate on as a republic. Here from the Daily Mail in the UK, quote, mystery fleet of U.S. Air Force tankers crossing the Atlantic stirs echoes of Iran strike ahead of secret military meeting. So when they had this military meeting of all these generals that were required to all come back to America to meet in person, at the same time, a huge fleet of refueling Air Force tankers was discovered to have left America heading for Europe, across the Atlantic. And the last time they did this was in the days leading up to the strikes on Iran that happened back in the summer. And so these are concerning developments, that these are clearly preparations for active military measures in Europe. Here from the Daily Mail in the UK, Pete Hegseth is, quote, crawling out of his skin. Pentagon insiders tell of explosive tantrums and erratic behavior as his wife is accused of making outrageous demands. So again, the head of the Department of Defense, or the renamed Department of War, and the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, is being described by certain of his underlings as being very agitated and having erratic behavior and tantrums. Now, how much of this is true, how much of this is criticism of those who are having their power taken away or are on the other side of the political spectrum, we don't really know, but these are concerning developments that the head of the most powerful military in the world is being described as being erratic. Here from a publication called Notice, billions of taxpayer dollars have become virtually untraceable. News of the United States, that's what Notice stands for. So it's probably, I would say it's probably trillions of taxpayer dollars, but this article says billions of taxpayer dollars are literally being spent and appropriated and manipulated in a way that no one really knows where it's going and how it's being spent. And these are, again, concerning developments. And again, it's this Russell Voigt from the Project 2025, who's now over the Office of Management and Budget at the White House, that is behind this strange manipulating of legislated dollars where we can't really know what's being done with them. So there's no accountability. Here from the Express in the UK, inside China's terrifying, quote, military city that's 10 times the size of the Pentagon. So the Pentagon, which is the nerve center and headquarters of the U.S. military in Alexandria, Virginia, across from the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. It's the largest building. The Pentagon is the largest building in the world. And here, apparently, China has built an entire military city that's 10 times bigger than the Pentagon in order to run their military. Which doesn't sound like a country that's not planning to enter into military confrontation. Again, here from Newsweek, speaking about that meeting where all the generals and admirals had to come together, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, tells top generals to, quote, prepare for war. So among the public messages that we were shared, and again, there are almost certainly private messages that we don't know about, but even among the public messages, one of the main ones was that the military has to be ready to fight war. That the purpose of the military, and in some sense, you know, that sounds legitimate. I mean, that is the purpose of the military, is to fight war. and that the military has been doing many things in recent years that aren't really preparing to fight war. But also the idea that we're preparing for war is a concerning development, because really we want to be prepared for war, but using that preparation to actually prevent war from happening. But instead, it looks like we're just going full steam ahead to World War III. At least that's the public propaganda that's being put out there to prepare people's minds for such a development. Here from the Hill, speaking of Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., Donald Trump urges military to use cities as, quote, training grounds. So these operations where the Marines and the National Guard are being deployed together with these ICE raids in these major cities in America is not simply to round up illegal immigrants, but is actually specifically publicly being said by President Trump that they ought to use these operations as preparation for a training ground for how to fight urban warfare in an actual war. And using American citizens, or supposedly illegals among American citizens, as their training ground. Looks like we're just about out of time, so maybe we'll stop there and pick up in our next study in the next article, because we're going to not be able to continue much more than a couple more minutes. Any thoughts or questions?
Yeah, I have a comment. Yeah. You know, the Lord cannot allow World War III to take place, because how would prophecy be fulfilled if World War III happens? I mean, nobody's going to survive World War III, right?
No, I don't agree with that. I think people will survive, and I think World War III is very likely to happen. I just think it'll be very short war, very intense, and very lethal.
Well,
And
if
then
nuclear,
the cries will go out for peace, peace. In fact, such a development might be a reason for the externalization of the hierarchy, for the demons to appear and say, you need to stop killing each other or you're going to kill everybody. And we're here to help you be peaceful and save you and not kill each other. There are many psychological ways that such a development could happen.
and these developments will be to prepare us to receive that, to accept that rather.
Yes. Well, they're all
Will be
preparing us to accept that. Yes.
just to basically psychologically weaken us
Yes.
to accept these things.
That's right. And to most importantly, to help us to not have correct discernment about what's really happening. That there's a whole nother satanic agenda that's happening, and that there's a public face to that satanic agenda that's deceptive. So I think the count's going to be needed for the Russian group, so maybe we should pray before we get cut off. Heavenly Father, our most holy creator God, we thank you so much that you've been able to help us to see some more of what's really going on in this world. Again, we've got many more articles just to get through, again, what's been happening in just the past 2 months. And we can see there's a staggering amount of developments that are happening so fast that almost nobody can really keep track of it all, except really the demons who are manipulating these things. And praise the Lord that Jesus is ultimately in control of it all, and that he will work out his purposes through these developments. Help us to love you more, to trust you more, and to look to you more, and to not be among those whose fear is leading their faith to fail. But increase our faith and strengthen our faith and help us to be ready and prepared as these things are about to break forth with an overwhelming surprise. Thank you so much for loving us and keep and preserve us until we can meet again, as our prayer. May it be in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Okay. What's the name of that article again about the psychological reasons for accepting the beast?